Okay, so I'm going to start with integrating secondary sources and writing with authority. What I learned, or I already knew about secondary sources before I walked into 1302, was that whenever I wrote a research essay, I would not look for resources the way Professor Garcia showed us by using the crap sheets, which is this that I'm showing you. So we could go deeper into the articles. From my past experience with research papers, I would just Google an article and hope it had any information that I was trying to answer or prove. During this process of finding 4 well-written secondary sources, I used Google Scholar and the UTRGV library database. Since my research question was not completely answered by the articles that I obtained, I had to go into depth and explain how everything affecting my question was somehow connected. So what I learned is the following. My first was that they had to be updated, and even the best looking sources cannot be a credible source. So in order to find out if it was a credible source, obviously before, what I already knew was that .com, anything with .com was not credible. What was acceptable was .gov, .org, .edu. Those were credible sources, obviously. But since I was using the UTRGV library database, those hard articles that were scholarly, but they weren't updated. So what I mean by that is so in the first question it says, when was the information published or posted? So obviously you would want to have data that's kind of new, but not, you don't want old data, because of course my question is about medicine. So medicine is evolving along with technology, so obviously you want the most recent. So this crap sheet would help you do that. So it would tell you if the information was revised or updated. It would tell you if it worked well with your research question. If it had any links to it. So some were PDF and some did have more credible sources or credible links attached to it. So you could use those. So you know that they weren't just getting the information from random places. Like it was actually somewhere where they knew what they were doing. It's like a little summary of what the whole source is about. So it tells you who were the authors, and by this, having this part in the crap sheet was so, I love this part because so it would ask you who the authors were, and obviously you would have to find the authors, and then it would ask you for if they had any information, emails, stuff like that, and well, you would have to go and Google search them, and you actually knew that they were professors or that they worked at a university, stuff like that. I actually had 2, since I had to get 4 credible sources. I actually had 2 who I thought were, I don't have them, but I got 2 who I thought that were really really good. But when I got to the point of finding out the authority and who was writing these sources, and I Google searched the author, it turned out that they were just random people with random opinions. They didn't even go to the university. They were in research people that specialize in research. It wasn't. They weren't well educated. Everything they got were from other websites. So that's why I thought this crap sheet was really good, necessary for me to finish my essay. So my first thing was that since my research question was under medicine, my articles had to be up to date since technology is changing and so is medical improvements. Like I said, this made you go more in depth into the article that you were looking for, so you would know how credible it was. So this impacted my writing because I had to provide information but still put my input on how I thought this had an impact on my research. So since my research question was this, why do scientists conduct experiments on endangered species? So my sources didn't, like, how do I explain it? My sources didn't really go straight into the point. So they didn't straight go to explaining like, oh, they did this because they did this because they did this. No. So I have an example here. So this is the Great Primate Debate, and this article just talked about curing HIV and Alzheimer's disease using primates, which are monkeys, gorillas, stuff like that, animals like that. And so then that's all it focused on, just the monkeys. So, and it didn't focus on like, oh, they're already endangered. No, it would explain like these monkeys are becoming endangered because of these tests that they're doing on them. So then I had to get my own information. I had to not paraphrase it, but annotate. I had to annotate this and just use what I had, like work with it and put my own opinion. So here my essay. So here it is, the Great Primate Debate. So I explained how the scientists are doing experiments on the primates and how they're slowly becoming more and more extinct. And the reason why they're becoming more and more extinct and like endangered is because of the HIV and Alzheimer's disease. Like they're trying to find a cure by using them, since they're the most, how do I explain it? They're the most similar or closely related to us. So they want to be like in the same category. So like they're not going to test on like frogs, obviously, and then expect for that to work on humans. So that's why they use primates. And the whole article, it was just about them, like animal activists, I don't know if I'm saying it right, worrying about if they become extinct, like what's gonna happen if they become endangered. So that's all. So it was like a reason why they were becoming endangered. It wasn't why they conduct experiments on endangered species. It's just that, like, why do they keep doing it if they're already becoming endangered? So that was my first essay, or my first paragraph. A second source is this one. And okay, so this source talks about how people's beliefs in medicine. So I watched a documentary. It's a documentary. It's called The Traffickers. It's on Netflix. I don't know. And I was watching it because once I read this source, like, it made me wonder more. And so since that documentary is like closely connected to this, I watched it. And it was talking about the rhinos, the horns of the white rhinos. How people from Vietnam and all of those places in the Middle East think that animals' body parts actually make a difference to humans. So what I mean is, like, they think they could actually cure them. So if they get a rhino horn and they mix it with water and they drink that every like 2 weeks, or something around there, they think that they are actually going to get cured without having to go to the doctor or without having to take any kind of medicine. So this talks about that, how animals are becoming extinct because the people have certain cultures, from certain cultures have certain beliefs that animal parts do make a change. And this is just trying to prove how they don't. Like, there's nothing, like, they have tested and let's see. It says, so like they use endangered species such as bear bile and tiger bone, and they did experiments to find out if it actually did a difference, and it didn't. So this is just saying how people are the major causes of endangered species being endangered, if without being well educated, that it doesn't do anything. And that's why scientists have started to test on the endangered species. So this one does answer my question, like why they're testing on the endangered species. Okay, so that's all for my sources, like on what I knew about the sources, what I didn't know, how I found out about this, and how this crapshoot was really, really helpful. So the next thing I'll be talking about is quoting my secondary sources. So as you can see, they're very long and they have a lot of information. So what I did was that I printed out all of my sources. So I had, let me show you. I had 4 sources. One of them which is not here. Oh, it is. Okay, so it is here. So I had 4 sources, and each one I printed out and I highlighted, annotated, and took what I knew from that and put it in my essay. So I had a rough essay, like first draft essay, I would say, and this was it. So as you can see, this is my first paragraph. Well, this is my intro, right? But this is my first paragraph. So then social media and all of that, like I wasn't really quoting any of my sources. I didn't even quote any of them. Okay, well here's one. I quoted this one. Well, actually I didn't even quote it. So I didn't quote anything because I didn't know I had to quote. Well, all I did was read the article and then just write like a little summary. So here, look, the article Endangered Species or Opportunity for Developing World. So I quoted the title and then I just wrote like a little mini summary about it. And then I moved on to the next paragraph. Same here. I just quoted the title and then I just wrote a mini summary about it. So obviously I did not know that I did know I had to quote. I just didn't know how to implement it into my writing. Like it didn't make any sense to me. So what I did, I decided to quote what the article referred to as an explanation of what they were doing to fix the problem, and after that I explained it in my own words by understanding of the context. So basically I dumbed it down. So what I mean by that is I got this from one of my peers that did one of my feedbacks. So this shows how to do a paragraph, like a research paragraph, and implementing the sources. So it tells you that you have to state the main point of the paragraph, and it gives you an example, and then it tells you to give evidence. So that's when you start quoting. That's when you get the quote from the research and paraphrase it. And then you explain the evidence, and then you get another quote that answers the first quote. And then you explain it, and then you go deeper into the point. So I followed this outline to do my quoting because obviously I did not know. So by showing this, you could see that I did not know anything. Like I didn't know how to quote, nothing. I just quoted the title and wrote a summary about it. But in my second essay, because I did do a second essay because I wasn't proud of my first essay, you could see here I quote the title, right? And then I talk about what the article was. I move on. And then, like, I explain what the article is about and move on. And then I use a quote. Right? So they're high cognitive ability and similar brain agriculture to humans. So this is where I was explaining that the primates are closely related to humans. So that's why they're testing on them instead of other animals. And then I go to explain what that means. And then, so I explain and I explain. So yeah. So as you can see, this part of my essay is better, much more understandable, because my other essay didn't have any quotes, nothing, as I just said. So here I have another one. I quote it, right? And then I explain what it was about. And then I quote it again and I explain. So I quote it. I quote this, and this explains my past quoting, and then I explain it again, and then I dumb it down a little bit for the reader to understand. So I did learn how to do that in English 1302. I did not know, obviously. So yeah, I think that was one of the best things, because now I think I have it down and I know what I have to do, and I know how to do certain essays, and now I feel proud. So I have that. So now I'm going to explain. So the impact it had on my essay was that with this information, it proved what I was trying to put out there, and it made it easier for me to explain what was going on and include facts. So this made it easier for me to put out there what my sources were trying to say, what I got from my sources, and if they answered my question. So obviously I did what I had to do. So okay, so moving on. The third thing I learned how to do was explaining deeper and using analogies. So in order to get the reader's attention, there has to be something that's going to hook them by having really good explanations of what the paper is really about. So now I'm going to explain what I did to use, to quote. So I started by explaining my quotes. So let me find a quote to here. And this is my quote. So I started by explaining my quote and why I thought that was a good quote for the paragraph. Then I used another quote to explain the first one, and that's when I decided to dig deeper and use my own knowledge and add the main idea to the article. So what I did was that I got this quote. So reinforcing this belief that wild medicinal materials are always more effective, natural, and have fewer side effects. So from there, I went on to people are very well educated to know about the effects of medicine, its ingredients. They may think it's the animal, but what's making the person better, but when in reality, it could be another drug that is nothing close to animal parts. So I explained what I learned about the quote, and then I put actual facts from the quote, or from the article. So it says that it did surveys for people to choose between farm animals and wild animals, which ones they thought were better choice for medicine. And then I explained more. So this was just a matter of protecting them, since it states that, and then I stated another quote that answered, that went with the other quote. So it said, consumers are in fact willing to pay a higher price for wild products rather than buy cheaper farmed products or substitutes. And then I explained that quote again. Being able to create an alternative can do that a lot of animals and cause decrease in amount of endangered species and used in over-the-counter products. So I dumbed it down. I knew what I didn't know if people were going to understand this, but I'll get to that later. But still, like, I tried to put my own thought in what I thought was what I thought the quote meant, so that people could understand it. So, like, if I understood it, I feel like people would understand what I said. I wasn't just repeating, I was actually putting facts from the article. So then, like I said, my challenges was that I had to be very careful with not having to repeat myself. So instead, I used different scenarios in which I thought was a good pair with what I was trying to say. This impacted me by knowing that knowing I had not only answered my own questions that I had about my own writing, but knowing that I understood it and maybe others would too. So I tried to explain it as easy as possible, as you could understand. So, because obviously the person reading this is not going to go back and read the whole article and annotate it. So I had to do that for them, and that's what I did by using the quotes. And using analogies that I go through, or that I have seen in the past, like in my social media and all of that stuff. So, another thing that I learned, or the fourth and last thing I learned about secondary sources, was that secondary sources is not the same thing as a primary source. So, I had no idea what a primary source was. So I didn't get. So this is how do I explain it? Like, embarrassing, but I didn't get a primary source till the very end of my essay. What I mean by that is that throughout the whole process of creating the essay, I never once had a primary source. She would say, "Oh, do you guys have your primary sources and all this stuff?" And I was just like, "Okay, like, I have my sources and I have one more source." So I had my 4 secondary sources, and then I had one more source which I thought was a primary source, but I was wrong. So a secondary source is just there to look and make the article make sense and help by giving facts about the article that can be included in the essay to make the research essay look understandable and still have bias or information that is really going on as we speak. So like I said, this source is a news article saying blah blah blah, this is happening, right? It's opinion. It's a news article. This is not opinion, but it's more like facts. But this has a survey. So surveys are opinions, and they're not really credible for a primary source. Like, a primary source is really, really different from a secondary source. So this is what a primary source is. A primary source is that, okay, well, the type of primary source that I used was a video. So obviously I had 3 videos because I didn't know which one to choose, but I also didn't know which video was under the category of being a primary, so I had to go through all of that. So what I did was that I used an interview of someone who has a facility that specializes in keeping animals alive and her opinion about a whole endangered species situation. Since my secondary sources articles were only focused on the medicinal parts of the research, she focused on talking about how in her area she sees and has opinions about habitats and environments that her thought on why certain animals are not well suited to be in labs and held hostage instead of being in the wild. So she's really well known. She's Jane Goodall. She is known for having habitats, or like conservation habitats. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. For gorillas. Since gorillas were becoming endangered, she's been working with this for, I think she said, 15 years. So she's like her own boss. So she knows what she's doing. She's not getting she's not getting opinions from someone else. She's not like, she knows what she's doing, and if you ask her certain questions, like, it's what she's been through. So that's what a primary source is. Primary source is about that person explaining to you what's going on, how she goes through it, how she's fixing it, like what's going on in the animal kingdom. Like, she knows that. And in articles, there's scientists. So scientists have to explain what they did to find a certain result. So lab reports, that would be lab reports. So lab reports are what scientists do in order to put their information out there. Sources. So how do I explain? So this source, let me see if it's this one. Okay, so this was the source that I had that I thought was my primary. So it talks about testing on giant pandas. How the giant pandas are or were becoming extinct, because now they're not extinct. Or why do I keep saying extinct? Endangered. Now they're not endangered. So it gives you all these numbers and all these data, but then it gives you these. These are all references. So what references are is like things that people used to know all this information. So even though it looks like a lab report from a scientist, it's not, because if it gives references, and that means it got information from these people. So, and you don't want that, because that's opinion, and that's not what a primary source is. So that's when I went into interviewing the scientist. So this is her, and well, she talks about many animals in the zoo. She talks about how she does funds and stuff. Like, she's been doing this for 15 years. So that's what I use as my primary source. And the way I put it in my essay is this. So I explained what the interview was about. I explained the, I didn't quote her, which I thought I should have quoted, and maybe I will quote her, but I explained everything she said, and so then I did put some stuff. So the reason zoos are becoming more and more part of conservation communities because they are fighting to save biodiversity in the wild. And then I go on to explain what she said. So Dr. Jane Goodman gives her experience as a field researcher in the wild and gives information about how all her conservation programs that are located in different countries are helping every animal who is endangered. So then I go on to explaining that I wanted a scientist who has on the job herself to tell me and show me how everything is done. So she goes on to explain how everything is done and what she does to conserve this. And then there's more. There's a lot of videos about her that explain. So she speaks at events. She travels the world. Like, she does it all. And well, this is what I used as my primary source. So, like I said, my challenges was trying to find a primary source, because not only did I not know what a primary source was, but I didn't know what kind of criteria I had to use to find the source. Turns out, any source giving you their opinion or just stating facts is a secondary source, but a primary source can be anything from an interview to an experiment. The whole point is that the person who owns the place or a scientist that did the experiment themselves is talking about their own work and not someone giving their own thought or opinion. The impact it had on my writing was that not only did I actually get the perspective of someone who is in charge of their own facility, but she also made it clear what happens behind those doors, how she handled certain situations, and for how long this research of endangered species has been going on. Now, I am going to move on to my second thing that I learned. So it would be the writing process. So this is what I knew before. So in my 1301 English class, I had to also do a research essay of my choice on my own. We were in the groups of 4, and throughout the whole semester, not once did we do what Professor Garcia did. So I did not have Professor Garcia in my first semester of English 1301. So I actually had another professor, and he, obviously not all professors teach the same. And in his class, I never once had to follow like a rubric, or we didn't do that in class. We didn't follow a rubric in class. So what we would do in class is we would talk about certain articles that he would tell us to write about, and then we would discuss that as a group of 4. So obviously we were in groups of 4. In Professor Garcia's class, we were also in groups of 4. But the only difference is that in Professor Garcia's groups, we were actually doing something for our essay. So what I mean is that, look, she gave us these. She would give us these to follow and to write about our sources. With my past professor, we never had an outline like these to follow. Nothing. We wouldn't spend time looking for our sources. We wouldn't spend time doing anything than to try, like, we wouldn't do anything to try to how do we explain it, to move on with our essay. So basically we would talk about something else, but we wouldn't talk about the essay. We would do things that talked about how, this article talks about how you don't have to explain everything, you don't have to be that smart to write an essay, and then we would have a whole conversation about it, and then we would have an activity about it. But we wouldn't be like, hey, did you guys bring this in? Like, did you guys find your secondary sources? Are you going to implement them? We never had that type of conversation. So with my professor, Bonnie Garcia, she actually made us follow certain outlines, and to be honest, that did make it easier, because in my past last semester, my essay was not, I'm gonna be real, my essay was not 8 pages long. The most, I think it was about 3 to 4 pages, but for sure it was not 8 pages long, and for sure I know that I did not put quotes. I did not get more than 4 sources. I probably only got like 2 sources. I did not explain a primary source. So I did learn a lot this semester. Even though I did have some rough patches, because since I didn't really think this was necessary, I didn't implement it as much as I should have. So, the first thing I learned was defining my research question answer, something that has been answered or questioned before. So, for last semester, my question was, how do bilingual students understand English? Something like that. Like, how do bilingual students understand the English department? How do they understand rhetorical reading? How do bilingual students understand rhetorical reading? So, obviously, that question had to be answered. Like, my articles were incredible. That's okay. I'm just trying to say, like, nothing was good about my last essay. If you go back and get my last semester essay, and get this semester's essay, there's going to be a huge drastic difference, and obviously you're going to know or notice I did learn a lot of things. So my question from last semester was that I didn't really, how do I explain it? I didn't really try to answer it. I just went to the UTRGV library database and I looked for a source and I used it. If it talked about my question, I got it, used it, wrote about it. Summarized basically what I did with this essay. That's basically what happened. And it wasn't even as long as this one. With this semester's question, I implemented my own major. So my major is in biology, and obviously medicine falls under that category. And I implemented, so my minor is environmental sciences, which means animals, habitats, So I implemented that, so endangered species. So this semester, I believe my question was much more the right path for me than the last question, because like I said, we just chose a question, we stuck to it, and that's all. This semester, we chose a question, we talked about how that question, like we spent like a week, which is like 2 days of her class, just seeing if that question was right for me, or for my, like, if that research question was right for me, and obviously it fell under my major and my minor. So I learned a lot by doing this research question. Like I said, for my research question, I focused on my major, which was biology. I wanted to find out about endangered species and how they were being tested. I did have some challenges because of my sources, obviously. I said that they weren't answering or like going straight to the point of my question. I had to really dig in there and understand and put like the puzzle together. So I had to stick to finding out why scientists test on endangered species and what was happening to the population, why it was still decreasing. Like I had, aside from trying to answer my question, I had to answer or question myself about those questions and try to answer them. This had an impact in my writing because now I know I know why, how, and when people test on animals, and I explained it in my essay. It just really made my essay so much more credible, I would say, because it contained a lot of information. So instead of just sticking to, why do scientists test on endangered species, I also answered how and when. So basically, I answered everything. I believe in my essay, I just didn't stick to one question. I literally had more questions and I answered those questions. So, like what I did in the first essay, I just put main point, main idea, summary, annotating. That's all I did. My second essay, I actually wrote why, when, how, and I put my sources and yeah. So the second thing I learned was that finding credible sources or relevant sources that made sense to my topic. So, like I said in the part of integrating secondary sources, the writing process for using secondary sources that are not answering your question is really difficult. So, like I said, I had to print out my sources. I literally just highlighted everything I needed to know, everything I thought was important, and then I just put that into my own words. Put quotes, explain the quotes, put another quote that answered the same quote, and then I explained that quote deeper into my understanding. So, not my opinion, but like what I understood from reading all those articles. So, yes, it was hard. Yes, I did do a certain outline. So, my first paragraph, which is this one, I put the primates because primates were not that big of a deal. Like this source was not like, oh, this answers to your question. No, this was just answering like why they test on them. So they test on them because they want to cure diseases like HIV and Alzheimer's. So I put that as my first source. My second source was this experimental is used in neuroscience and medicine. Oh, okay. So my second source was human animal chimeras. So this source was about getting animals until they're mature enough, taking away their genetics, taking away a human's genetics, and putting them together and creating a human animal. So this was my secondary source because this was not testing on endangered species. It was just talking about how this would cause species to get endangered or to be endangered if they kept on testing and testing, and if something didn't come out right, it explains how they were afraid something might go wrong, the animal might get feelings, it would become an actual human. So this wasn't really thought about, but it was talking about endangered species. Like it would talk about how if they made the human animals, they would use their, let's say, their lung to do a lung transplant, or they would use their heart to do a heart transplant instead of people waiting months and maybe years for transplants. So that's what this was talking about, and how animals would become, if eventually they would become endangered and to the point extinct, and that's not what many people wanted, and would explain like bias and people that were for it and people that were against it, the pros and cons. So that's what I did for my second. For my third was consumption and protection of wild animals used in traditional medicine. So this was more like, as you went down the article, it would talk about more and more about how animals are being tested and how they are becoming endangered because of this. So obviously animals are used in medicine. So this explained how they were using cultures are using animals to put in medicine because they think that animals are a better and safer way than to use manufactured drugs. So like Advil, ibuprofen, like all of those stuff, they think that's better. So how do I explain it? So what they mean, okay, so I'm Mexican, so in my culture they always say that tea and honey, like pure honey bee, like honey, mixed together helps get rid of a sore throat. So it's things like that that make animals become extinct. Obviously, you don't need to kill the bee to get honey, but this was okay. This wasn't a good scenario, but like that's what I'm trying to say. Like for this, you don't need to kill the bee in order to get the honey and like prove to yourself that it's working. For other animals, such like the wild animals, that's what it says here. Wild animals are becoming extinct because of this. So that's where everything else comes in place. The white rhino, how they use the horn, because in some cultures it says that it works in medicinal purposes. In other cultures it explains how how it explains how in other cultures wearing the horn means high class and all these things. So there's many reasons why animals are becoming extinct, but mainly it's because of this. So this is why I put medicine or medicine as my third. My fourth was yes, the panda. So in the panda source, it would talk about how they would try to fix animals from becoming endangered. So by this it means artificial insemination. So I decided to put this last because this was talking about how my problem could be fixed. So I thought, okay, so I gave you all these things. The first one, it talked about how they use animals that are similar to humans to test on them. The second one was about chimeras. The third one was about how the medicine is slowly endangering, making animals more and more endangered. And well, the last one would be fixing that problem. So that's why I chose this one. And then for my last primary source, I used the interview, and then I concluded the whole essay. The third thing I learned was that collecting the data, knowing what made sense and what didn't, using visuals and quotes. So I talked about my quoting and how I quoted. The fourth thing I learned was using my primary source, what's the purpose, expectations, and do I agree with it. I just explained my primary source. I knew the expectation, I knew what I wanted for my source. So I wanted for someone to explain to me what's going on. I didn't want someone to be like, oh yeah, I heard she said this. No, I wanted someone to be like, yes, I did this, and I did this. So I also wanted to see if I agreed, and obviously I did agree. She explained how she thinks certain animals such as the elephants, the rhinos, the giraffes shouldn't be, like big wild animals shouldn't be in the zoos for conservation purposes, because that's not what they are. That's not what they're supposed to be doing. They're meant for the wild. But she also goes on to explain how she has seen with her own eyes, or she has seen while she's in the fields working, she has seen hunters hunt these animals down. And she explains how they are better off in the zoo being in captivity than they are in the wild, because of all these hunters, all these environmental changes because of us. So basically she goes on to try to say that we are trying to fix something that we broke, basically. And she says that by doing this, it's not only like a constant like repeating thing, but it's more like there has to be a change. And that's what she's been trying to do for 15 years, trying to change by focusing on one animal, and she's focusing on the gorillas. So that's why I chose this primary source, and that's why I put it last, so it could like overall do a summary about it. The third thing I want to talk about, or the third thing I learned would be peer feedback. I do not okay, here. Since I had a rough beginning, and some obstacles throughout the whole process of creating my paper, I had 2 papers done because I was not satisfied with the first paper I did, which is this one. When I finished the first paper, I knew I had done a bad job at trying to answer my questions. However, when I did my second paper, I followed an outline that I got from a teacher that previously was my English teacher. Since I had a rough first essay, I didn't get the chance to get feedback from my classmates, so then I turned to all my friends who had an English class, and they provided me with a lot of good-looking feedback. However, it was not the feedback Professor Mercier was looking for. So just like I said, I did not, since I wasn't behind, but I did not meet the criteria of the essay that Professor Garcia was looking for. I did not get a chance to get feedback from my peers, from my class. So what I did was, I did get feedback from Bonnie, Professor Bonnie Garcia, but by the time she gave me feedback about this paper that I have here, I had already finished this paper. And so so here's some feedback. So Bonnie Garcia did give me a lot of feedback. So like she says that I'm not sure what I'm talking about. I need to connect my 2 sources. I need to connect my ideas. She goes on to saying that I have to identify my primary research. So that would be here. I didn't even include my primary research in this essay. So she goes on to talk about gap. So we did do gaps. So this was, let's see, like, what gaps do you see in your secondary sources? So the gaps I see, mostly talking about required animals. They don't mention other animals they require to be used in experiments. Like, I wasn't fully going through with what I had to do. So she did give me a lot of feedback. What primary research did you do? How would it contribute to existing research? Right now, that doesn't meet the criteria to pass. You can fix by developing meaningful discussion. I want you to break out of the habit of thinking your secondary research will serve as an answer to your research question that isn't research, that's a report. So, by her telling me this, right here, I was able to create this. And this is so much better. And she only had to critique, of course, my primary. So I need to put, what did my sources fail to investigate? Why is it important? How will your primary research add to the conservation discussion? How does it add something new? Why is it important? Don't be afraid to interview directly and explain how she is saying compares to your secondary sources, and answer your research question. Use what she is saying to answer your research questions. And that's when I went on to do this. Obviously, like I said, I didn't get feedback from my peers. I turned to my I printed this paper out. I printed the paper out. I think 6 papers. Yeah, I printed up 6 papers. I gave them to 6 different friends of mine, and I told them to give me good advice, or not advice, but good revisions, so I could make this better, because obviously I was not cutting it with this essay. Okay, so my friends, what they did was that they gave me grammar. Like, they tried to fix my grammar, they tried to, like, my punctuation, my spelling, not once did they say, like, oh, this sentence doesn't make sense, or this doesn't make sense. So that's not what I was looking for. So that's when I turned to my previous English teacher, and I told her that I needed help, that I needed for her, like, I needed to see if she could tell me what was wrong with my essay. And yes, she told me what was wrong with it. She told me how to fix it. She told me, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this, this is what makes sense. Like, you can't, she told me, basically, I learned a lot. So she also told me how not to use I. So in this essay, I start off with I. So I am a big animal lover. I automatically do my research. I could possibly do it. I hear about helping animals. I. That's all I was using, and that's not what research is about. Research is about understanding your articles that made you want to do this research. So I started with animal rights. I explained how there's different cases all around the world. I explained the business, like how difficult this business is. I explained how my articles were all focused on one thing. So not once did I just talk about what I thought, my opinions about what I read. I actually got information. I answered what I needed to be answered. I explained everything. It wasn't just on me. Like, I think people who support animals are trying to find other ways to use animals for further experiments. No, I did. Those who support animals, that's the type of essay that this research paper was supposed to be, not just about me and my opinions. So obviously she did help a lot. I'm really proud of this essay, and I do think I learned a lot. Although I did have some rough patches throughout the whole semester, I think I came back knowing what I did. This essay, or this certain essay reflects on what I am saying, because obviously you could see a drastic change here. I would also say that the person who is providing you the feedback, you should also, these are some things that I learned. that you should also give them the articles so they can critique, read the articles, and state their own facts and opinions of what they understood from the reading. So what I did is that I gave them my articles. Obviously, I didn't just give them the paper. Because they are not into animals. They don't know anything about animals. Obviously, if that person is not your audience, they will not understand anything. They would just like, okay, this sounds like, oh, I didn't know about this. I didn't know about this. Like, obviously, I had to give them the articles. They did not have to read them. However, they were already annotated. I just did like copies. They were already annotated for them to see like which were the parts that I got to integrate in the essay. So that was a good thing that I included the article so they could be like, oh yeah, like this makes sense. Like now I know why she put this first, or now I know why she put this last. So that was really good for me to get feedback. It gives the reader an idea of what is happening for them to know that these are straight facts from the scholarly articles, that way they can put what they think into better understanding. I used their feedback to try to make the essay as understandable as possible by adding more than 4 explanations. It was challenging for me to see what everything was so very important, but I still had to stick to what I thought was best about my essay. But I did take into account some feedback. That's why my second essay is better than my first. This impacted my writing because now I know what to expect in my next one, and I know how to get the reader's attention. So by them telling me like, hey, this sentence in the source might be good for you to implement, like include it in this paragraph. Now I know how I should request for feedback, because before I even did this essay, of course, I'd had this one and I just gave it to them and told them, hey, like, fix it for me, and then I'll see if I want that and I'll fix it. And that helped me turn it into what it is now. So that helped me do it into what it is now. They did provide sentences that made sense to them instead of just trying to fix grammar errors. So once I gave them my articles, they did start, instead of just telling me like, oh, you spelled this wrong, or you should use this word better, or you should use this word, they started putting in their own opinions, like, hey, maybe you should use this sentence, or maybe you should use this quote instead of this quote. Like, this quote makes more sense because this has a better answer to it. Like, this is more, like, I don't understand this. You should quote it like this, and I understand it. Like, that is what made my feedback better. So, of course, I did not get feedback from the peers that I wanted, but I did get feedback from my peers. I did get feedback from a professional. Well, not a professional, but an educator. And I just want to say that I did learn from this. Like, I learned my mistakes, I learned everything, and now everything that I have right now, I think I have it, like, I know I can go back to it, and I can have it saved and use it for my future classes that will ask me for essays. And now I won't have a problem. Like, the outline and the process will be so much easier. And yeah, I just want to say that. And I just think this process that Professor Garcia showed us is so much better than just having to look for a source annotate it, write it, blah blah blah. No, this, like, even though this took long, like it wasn't that hard, but it did take a long process. It's still way easier. Like, in the end, once you have everything done, you could just grab what you got. So grab this and read it, understand it, put it in your essay. She also gave us like how to do introductions. Oh my god, how to do introductions. And so we did 3 types of introductions. So we did a question, we did a reaction, and then you just chose whichever introduction and you just put it in your essay. I think that was really smart. So yeah, I'd rather be going step by step, and I liked how she put everything, how she made it into a game. And so yes, I did learn a lot. I will use this for my further classes, and I just want to say thank you. That's it.